Hi, everyone. Everyone, I would like to welcome you all to the Malta Stock Exchange Executive Spotlight. This is our first program whereby we will be showcasing executives involved in the capital markets and financial industry. And the good news is we've got a top-notch guest this time around, Joe. We have Joe Gavin, who is the new CEO of the MFSA. Joe, welcome.
Joe, thank you very much. And very nice to be here with friends of the Malta Stock Exchange. Thank you.
It's always good having you. Joe, you came to the Stock Exchange, what, about 6 weeks ago when we had lunch?
Yeah, indeed. And a very good exchange of views about issues around the capital markets and how maybe to develop the capital markets, and some very interesting discussions. And you then kindly invited me to give a talk at the MSE annual dinner, which turned out to be a fantastic evening.
It went very well. And not only that, but as many of you are fully aware, we have the Malta Stock Exchange Business Review, which we come out with every year. And you are a featured guest there also.
So, well, hopefully I'm not getting overly exposed, but certainly it's been a busy time. I've been delighted to have met hundreds of people in the financial sector on one-on-one meetings, rounds of speeches, meeting groups from the various stakeholder groups, the Bankers Association, the Institute for Financial Service Practitioners. And what is clear to me is that there's a very vibrant financial sector here, notwithstanding the challenges that I see that Malta faces.
Agreed. No, I don't think it's a question of being overexposed, Joe. I think it's more focus on the industry wanting to know who you are.
Oh, indeed. No, I think it's important to be out there and that we communicate a clear message about what our strategy is and how we are going to implement it, and that people have a clear idea what to expect from the MFSA in 2022.
Okay, good. So let's start with the first question. Who is Joe Gavin?
Well, I've been a friend of Malta for 20 years. That's the first thing. I have long-standing friends in the financial sector and in the public sector here that I've known for 20 years. And I've had several very valuable clients in Ireland, in my capacity as a lawyer in Ireland, from Malta. Just to give you a bit of background, like yourself, well, first of all, I'm Irish. I've been in practice really for 43 years. I trained initially as a lawyer in Dublin. I then did a master's in business administration with the Smurfit School of Business. I then went to the United States and I spent 5 very productive years with one of the major Boston firms at the time, Bingham, Dana, and Gould. And what's hard to remember is that all the major depository banks were literally around the corner from Bingham Dana. So you had State Street, Brown Brothers Harriman. So all of the global names were literally around the block.
Right.
So that was a terrific experience. I then came back and practiced law in Dublin for the next 20 odd years and built up a successful financial services practice. Now, law in Dublin is, I'd say, quite similar to law in Malta. You have to be good at a lot of things. You can't just be good at one thing.
Right.
Because if you're good at one thing, well, it may not come along again for, you could be hungry for half the year. So you need to get to be good at lots of different things. So I set out my stall in financial services. And so I would have advised funds, asset managers, issuers of prospectuses, loan note programs, capital markets, financial regulation. Now, something to bear in mind, and again, over the period of the last, say, 25 years, the scale of EU regulation went from this thin to this large. That's all been in the past 10, 15 years. So I remember when we were dealing with the Investment Services Directive, And this was the one that affected financial services in the main. It was basically 6 pages long. Yeah. So that's all you needed to know. But anyway, so a major turning point came in 2009 when I was asked if I would become the first person to be the legal general counsel to the Irish Central Bank at a point in time when the Irish economy was going through the global financial crisis and banks were collapsing all around us. So I came and I joined a terrific team led by Governor Patrick Honohan, who is held in very high regard at the highest levels in the EU, the US, I was part of his team that merged the financial authority into the central bank and did all of the crisis management to reform the structures and deal with the problem banks. So once the bond, at that point, I became an expert in European monetary policy. And that involved a very significant engagement with the European Central Bank, because our biggest problem, once we'd gone into the EU IMF program, our bond yields had gone from investment grade to something like 17%. Mm-hmm. So we were not able to access wholesale market money. There were a number of short-term measures that were then transformed into longer-term measures. And this all had to be done with the agreement of the European Central Bank that we were not interfering with financial stability. And so we undertook that exercise in a very calculated way. Once we succeeded in that in 2014, the bond yields came back to investment grade, and Ireland was then able to go back into the wholesale markets. I knew my job was done, right. And so then I said, okay, go back to practice.
Good. You said something interesting earlier. You said that many years ago, regulation was so high, and today it's gone a lot higher. Now, you've lived in the United States for 5 years in Boston, you said, so you know a bit about U.S. politics. In the United States, you have 2 major political parties, right? You've got the Democrats and you have the Republicans. Democrats tend to be a little bit more regulation loving, right? And the Republicans tend to be a little bit more regulation hating, right?
I would have said it's more taxes rather than regulation.
Okay, there you go. Here in the EU, it seems like everyone is pro-regulation, particularly in the financial industry. How sustainable is this? Now, don't get me wrong. I'm the chairman of the Malta Stock Exchange. There is no question that investors, that the guy in the street wants regulation. They want to ensure that they're being protected. But where do you get to the point where there's just too much regulation? Where do you get to the point where the guy who's investing is paying for all this regulation?
No, I get the point. The bar for entry and running a financial sector business in terms of compliance with the regulation is high. There's no question about it. And there's a convergence now. And it all stems from measures that arose out of the global financial crisis that, the notion that an institution is too big to fail is no longer acceptable. Yeah. Now, that requires very intensive scrutiny and reporting and compliance across the board in terms of banking, insurance, asset management, et cetera, et cetera. I think the way forward, and I think it's a challenge for all of us, is actually to up our game in terms of our tech reporting, our use of IT, and protection, obviously, of our IT from cyber attacks. Mm-hmm. So I see that, it's an increasingly digitalized world, and, that's going to be where the solution will be, and that's where we're going to have to invest time and money and effort. Okay,
so you were the legal counsel to Central Bank.
Yeah.
Then you went back to private practice. Yeah. Now you are the CEO of the MFSA. It's a 420-man operation, man and women operation. Yeah. Right. Yeah. I've been working here in Malta in the financial industry since 2009, and I've had a lot of exposure. People at the MFSA. And most people here in Malta, particularly the foreigners who are setting up in Malta, will give the MFSA a lot of credit for professionalism, for the quality of the people, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah.
What is your first impression? What has to change at the MFSA? What has to change
number one, I compliment senior management and the entire staff. The overall caliber of the staff who I've met from across the organization, I think stands a very favorable comparison with any other authority you'll find in Ireland or other places. Mm-hmm. So the caliber of the people is excellent. We've got a great dynamic young group of kids who are very clued into what they're doing. They're very interested and committed. So this is terrific. I think in terms of challenges that we face, I think really one of them is about the how we invest in IT to improve our interface and exchange with subject firms. So we hear, complaints about overlapping in processes, duplication, and false starts in terms of digital projects that we thought would actually move us to a different place. Mm-hmm. So clearly we need to up our game, and we have a clear plan to do that over 2022, with a view to putting in a longer term digital framework that actually will be more fit for purpose in the modern world. Right.
Well, what's your headcount forecast? Are you folks comfortable with your staffing, or do you plan on getting bigger?
That's a good, I mean, I think you're always going to have people leaving a public authority. We've experienced it with some of the millennials who want to go and do something else. Mm-hmm. And who may feel that 3 years experience of this was actually useful. Mm-hmm. I don't see my career as a job for life. I want to learn something here and then go and apply and learn something over there. Mm-hmm. So I'm a classic example of it. Right. As are you.
Yeah. And it seems, by the way, you folks are hiring more foreigners, right?
Well, I wouldn't put it that way. I think I'd say the complement is, I'd say it's 90% Maltese. Mm-hmm. I think there were perceived gaps in terms of specific skill sets a number of years ago, and I think the correct measures were taken in that situation. So just to finish on this point, I think we have an excellent team of people, and they're well committed. They're on the money in terms of their knowledge of their subject matter. Mm-hmm. And I think with a more coordinated IT, I think we'll actually be able to do a better job.
Mm-hmm. When we met a month or so ago, when we had lunch here at the Malta Stock Exchange, you had said that one of your priority areas was going to be asset management.
Well, yes, indeed. And let me tell you, because I came across Malta in the first instance through asset management, when you guys implemented the UCITS directive. So I gave some consultations to some of the local lawyers here and some other folks in terms of how to implement UCITS into a so-called UCITS umbrella fund. And that was one of the happy coincidences that brought me to Malta. Now, what I realized was that the asset management sector did well for a period of time, including up to introduction of the AIFMD, the Alternative Investment Fund Directive, in 2012, 2013. And then after a transition period, I think it was around 2016, started to fall into decline owing to the absence of a passport provision that lapsed in that directive, allowing passporting of depository services. So from 2016 onwards, it became mandatory, if you're going to set up a fund in Malta, that you had a local depository.
Which is, by the way, very anti-European, isn't it?
Now, I totally agree with you, and I'll tell you why. Because it's freedom of movement of service. Mm-hmm. And so, that's what the EU, is all about is actually freedom of individuals, freedom of capital, freedom of services, and so forth. So, so that actually is the glue that binds the EU together. So, to my mind, it's protectionist by the larger jurisdictions.
Right. But fast forward to AIFMD2,
yeah,
where now finally we have some friends in the EU discussing more friendly measures when it comes to custody. Talk to us about that.
Well, exactly. So I think the passport service for depository services has been reintroduced into the revised AIFMD directive recently published by the European Commission. What we will face is a political struggle with the larger jurisdictions in terms of the presidency of the European Council and the European Council meetings that will actually deliver the final version of the directive. So we have a lot of challenges on our plate. Nonetheless, having said that, I always believed that there were good niche areas that an economy like Malta ought to be able to tap into. So, for example, one of the areas that struck me was, well, say fund sizes below, for example, 100 million. I could see the cost benefit analysis of fund administration and so forth being more compelling in a jurisdiction like Malta for such funds. I also perceive that if you tweak the various fund authorization structures, and we've done this in Ireland from time to time. So, for example, we have what's called a registered AIF, a registered alternative investment fund. What that means is that the fund manager needs to have a very light business plan, and the individuals responsible need to pass the test of fitness and probity. But you do not go through the extensive authorization process. So I'm discussing some of these ideas with the folks in the Institute for Financial Service Practitioners in a collaborative way, along with the tax advisors and along with the accountants, to come up with where do we see the optimal position for Malta to revive its asset management activities. And I think it may have been neglected by a race into other new areas like fintech, etc. So what I'm trying to do is, okay, guys, this is a very solid international industry. We want our part of it. We may have fallen behind a little bit. And I think we also need to get a lot better at our international lobbying. So if you think about it, the Irish funds industry has a very significant lobby group. The Luxembourg funds lobby group is more significant again.
Right.
I think the Malta funds lobby group is a little bit silent, and I'd like to see a lot more effort at an international level. And I think that those kind of efforts are the ones that will pay off at the European Council.
Yeah. Well, we have Finance Malta here, and we have the funds group, and actually, I think they've done good work, but you can only do as much as how big your budget is, right?
True. And also, what the agreed program is.
Yeah.
So I think, first of all, it's very important for me to have engagement with each of the stakeholders in each sector.
Yeah, an initiative which I'm very proud of is the Malta Stock Exchange bought 500 slots of commercials on Bloomberg TV. The only issue is we couldn't afford them, so we sold them to other stakeholders, i.e. Finance Malta and Malta Enterprise. Yeah. And for 6 months, we had five commercials a day for 6 months in Europe and in MENA area, showcasing Malta. And you're right. I think we need to do that because there's a lot of really good. There's a great concerted message we can get out of Malta, and that is that Malta is a great place to do business.
Absolutely agree. And also, I think we need to be talking to our friends. So there are plenty of top lawyers, top tax advisors in London, Dublin, elsewhere, who will be interested in innovative structures in Malta that allow for maybe more efficient distribution of interest and income.
Right. Now, I had a sneak peek. I read your article on the Malta Stock Exchange Business Review. And in the article, if I recall, you had said that in your first 3 months as CEO, you met with roughly 300 people.
Yeah.
Okay. So I imagine these people are your top people at the MFSA, people at the MSE, and people within industry. What are people saying? What are they suggesting? What are their complaints? I'm sure there's probably a bit of a single voice. What do they say about the MFSA or about the financial industry?
I think it's quite a lot of the stuff we've discussed already. So in terms of streamlining, authorizations, better engagement in terms of applications, quicker turnaround. Now, I think one thing I think we need to be careful about is the whole issue of fitness and probity and suitable people coming into the industry, because our job is to be a gatekeeper. Our job is to keep unsuitable people out of the regulated financial sector. And our job is to go and scrutinize the suitability of these people by reference to their probity and their competence. So we're not doing our job if we let them in and we have to kick them out. I think people do complain about the length of time it takes to go through the individual questionnaires. Sometimes are they overly detailed? Are they too bureaucratic? So on and so forth. But there's a real issue of substance here that we really need to be careful about, because the failure to keep proper records in terms of ultimate beneficial ownership, these kinds of issues, suspicious transaction reports. This is what sets the trail towards non-compliance with AML, CFT, and leads us back into an area we don't want to be in.
Right. You mentioned technology, and you're absolutely correct. For example, the PQ, that's a personal questionnaire that you have to fill out with the MFSA if you can take on certain senior roles. And you said it, I didn't, but you said it's very lengthy, robust. It gets down to a lot of granularity, right? You have to talk about where you were 20 years ago, et cetera, which is fine. But here's my question. How can you make the process of getting authorized by the MFSA just a little bit more user-friendly and a little bit more timely?
Well, I think there are certain processes that can be done easier for some processes than others. So fund applications, certain types of fund manager type of applications. I think certain types of designated person individual questionnaires. So, depending on the particular role the individual is taking on. But I think we need to be a little bit careful about this, because one of the things I detected was that I realized there's a great cohort of senior people here on the island who are very capable of providing real substantive guidance to regulated entities. And I'm hearing that people find it a challenge to deal with some of these forms. I think actually embracing that challenge is our best protection when the likes of the European Banking Authority, the likes of the European Securities Markets Authority, when they all start come here and scrutinize the details of how we have filled out our various applications. So you can be damn sure we're not the only people looking at this. So, at a certain point in time, in respect of a regulated firm, that sort of information will be shared with other institutions, other public institutions throughout the EU, including the European Central Bank and others. So we need to have our house in order.
Okay, indeed. Anyone who has questions for Joe, Gavin, please send them in. We're very happy to entertain some of your questions. So by all means, do send them in, please. Joe, I lived in the United States for 21 years. I worked either as a futures and options trader or as an FX trader.
Yeah.
Right? And in the US, you know, we have those series exams, Series 7, Series 3, Series 63. In the US, to be licensed to manage client money, okay, generally speaking, the process is you need to pass an exam, which is a Series 7. And in my day, it was a 7-hour exam. It was in 2 parts. It was a very difficult test. You need to pass that. And then you needed to get fingerprinted so your records can go into the FBI database to see if you're a crook or not. And that was it, right? I don't think FINRA or the SEC cared whether you were a 15-year-old computer whiz kid. If Goldman Sachs wanted to hire you as a trader, they would, and the responsibility would fall on them, right? So if this kid loses a lot of money, Goldman Sachs is going to be the subject of a lot of lawsuits. So here's my question. Should the European regulator judge who's competent and who's not competent? Isn't that up to the fund manager and the board of the fund management company to say someone is competent to take on a role as a portfolio manager or director?
I think there have been enough serious problem cases in Europe that overwhelmingly proves that point. So we've had, you know, many portfolio managers went crazy. We've had many scenarios where traders went crazy, where in fact their trading wasn't trading, it turned into gambling. And their reporting was fraudulent. So we've got many examples of serious bad cases where, you know, it's really important that the person who's managing other people's life savings is actually held to account. Now, I have a little sort of a bugbear regarding the legal system here in Malta, and I'll tell you what it is. I've been hearing from various sources that, you know, a public authority, the likes of the Malta Financial Services Authority, may not impose a sort of a financial sanction above a certain amount. Otherwise, it's considered to be a criminal sanction. And this is apparently stated to be on grounds of proportionality. I think the notion of proportionality is a multi-dimensional concept. So if you have a scenario where you have a rogue trader managing third client, you know, client assets, making, you know, wrong decisions outside of the agreement with the client, and loses the life savings of all these people, you seriously telling me that this person cannot be held to account?
No, of course they should. Of course they should. But the question is ultimately it's going to be the fund management company or the board that's going to be held to account, right?
If it's got the solvency. So, you know, generally they're not, you know, they're not like, you know, asset managers are not the same as banks because they're managing, you know, more like investment banks. They're managing third client, you know, client monies.
By the way, we're running out of time. We've got roughly 10 minutes left to go. So if you have any questions, by all means, send them over. Let me ask you this question. You mentioned the P word. Everyone loves mentioning the P word. That's proportionality.
All right.
Okay. As you know, UCITS and AIFMD and many EU directives are written with proportionality in mind. Okay. Malta is the smallest country in the EU. The money managers that we attract right now aren't the BlackRocks of the world. They are the smaller money managers. Managers who are managing 5 million, 10 million, 20 million TER ratios of 2-3%. Is there any way we can make the regulatory process just a little bit easier for the emerging managers, for the small managers?
Yeah, and like I say, I think there is this concept of what's called a register date, which is below 300 million, and so you can go through a notification process rather than a full licensing process. So this is something I'm keen to explore with industry.
Good. So we do have a question. Let's see here. MFSA/Malta has been deafeningly silent, boy, on PSD2 and has missed the boat when the said directive was transposed in 2018. Payments is the denominator of financial service. How can Malta recoup on the years lost? Is this a topic you're familiar with?
Absolutely. PSD2 is something I've been very familiar with, and the EMI directive. I've advised many clients in Ireland on these sort of regulatory issues. I think there's a fundamental issue that's holding back Malta as a financial sector economy. And I think it's the lack of a real-time gross settlement system of settling interbank money with the ECB. So we don't have our own national system. We're relying on correspondent banks excessively. And I think it actually could transform the landscape of not only banks, but also EMIs and payment institutions, because what we see is that there's actually quite a vibrant sector from what I've seen and discussed it with the guys in terms of payment institution firms. And the quality of some of these is very impressive. But what is interesting to me is that guess where they're routing their payments? Estonia, Lithuania, Latvia.
Yep.
So I think, we really need to take ownership of this issue, I believe.
But it's my understanding that our central bank is working on that, aren't they?
I do believe so, but I think we really need to take ownership of this.
Okay, we have another question. Does the MFSA have plans to elevate and attribute more relevance to the role of compliance officer? I'm familiar with lots of compliance officers, and I can tell you they are very relevant.
100%. It comes back to, in a very simple way, the notion of maintaining, proper due diligence, proper reports, proper compliance, that the person who came to you says, who is the person they say they are, and you can trace the ultimate beneficial ownership. And, and that things like suspicious transaction reports are not just clerical errors. These are things that are actually, there should be a judgment call going on in people's heads. Is this the sort of thing that we ought to be concerned about? And when that little alarm bell goes off, you actually do something about it.
By the way, these two questions are coming from a gentleman that doesn't have a Maltese last name, so it sounds like former me. I have to say this, I don't know to what extent you're familiar with Malta, but GRC in Malta is alive and well. Governance risk compliance is alive and well. I know lots of compliance officers. I've been involved in lots of board meetings. I think the law firms do a great job. I think the accounting firms do a great job. You'll find a lot of professionals here.
No, I already have.
They take their post very seriously. And by the way, they have to, because it's a small country, right? It's a small industry, and your reputation is everything, isn't it?
Well, you've got a well-educated population, and you've got a very enthusiastic, capable bunch of people here.
Okay, we're almost done. I've got two more questions for you. You came from Ireland. Ireland went from having literally no financial industry to being a financial industry powerhouse in roughly 25 years, right?
Yeah, that's right.
How did they do that? How can Malta learn from the Irish model?
Okay, they established their risk appetite. In some areas, it was too risky. So in the area of banking, got it completely wrong. So we ended up in an EU IMF bailout program in the order of 100 billion, along with all sorts of revolving debt with the European Central Bank and so forth. We ended up in a very bad place. Equally, other sectors that we focused on, for example, asset management, turned out brilliantly, absolutely brilliantly. I think the Target 2 real-time gross settlement helped. I think the actual, good domestic banking system kind of helped. And there's another point, and I think it's worth just noting, not to make a special point about it, but the Irish did a risk assessment of areas they did not want to touch, and one of those was offshore private trusts because of the AML implications. So they said, this was nearly 30 years ago. They said, we're not going near that. They were being encouraged by some of the larger institutions. Oh yeah, come on, this is a nice way of doing business, et cetera, et cetera. But once the Irish central bankers, in connection with the guys in IOSCO, looked and they said, no, this is dangerous.
Yeah. Ireland has done amazingly well in the fund space, obviously the capital market space, right? Because
indeed,
the Irish Stock Exchange has always been bigger than we have, but I'm very proud of this statistic. The Malta Stock Exchange has more domestic listings in the Irish Stock Exchange.
Well, indeed. I mean, I compliment Malta. You actually have a functioning stock market in terms of equities and bonds. More so, I would say, than Irish issuers. Where Ireland has really excelled has really been as a European listing centre, allowing bond issues to claim the Eurobond tax exemption on interest off the bonds.
Okay.
So so it's got a very technical purpose. They're not actually traded, but by virtue of being listed, they qualify for the Eurobond exemption on payment of coupons, which is a hugely attractive benefit for issuers.
Okay, last question. So if anyone wants to ask another question, by all means do. And thank you, Stefan. Okay, you are local. Thank you. CMU, when are we going to see anything plausible about Capital Markets Union?
Well, you know what? It moves at so many different levels. And that's one of the things I see on a day-to-day basis, that we're moving at one moment from the most minute problem in the next minute to some of the biggest issues taking place at a European level. So, for example, when I go to a supervisory board meeting at the European Central Bank in Frankfurt or wherever, we're expected to deal at the top of the table. Now, we have to bear in mind what's fit for purpose for the local economy and what will improve and provide sustainable growth for the local economy. That, to me, is the key.
Excellent. Well, there you have it. This was our first webinar in regards to the Executive Spotlight. Next month, we're going to have another one. We're going to have Angelo Schwierip and Michael Warrington here. Simon Zamit, our CEO, is going to be interviewing them. So by all means, do tune in, because I think it's very important that we at the Malta Stock Exchange get the word out, that we have a robust capital markets. And I know everyone wants to hear what listed companies have to say. So, Joe, thank you very much. It's a real pleasure. Thank you. Good day. Thank you.